Starting with Bluebird Bio, I get to welcome Dr. Vinod Prasad, who's their VP of Medical Affairs and Clinical Research Development, and he'll be talking to us about the gene therapy for cerebral ALD.
Well, thank you very much, Amber. You're doing so well after being away up all night on a red-eye flight. I had 3 hours of sleep last night. I got here at 1 o'clock, and you're doing better than me. So thank you, and kudos to you. Thank you, ALD Connect, for inviting me to do this presentation. But a bigger thank you to ALD for doing what you do to provide this level of support and almost an extended family to patients with ALD, AMN, and everyone else who is involved in it is just exemplary, and we are really grateful to you. The other reason I wanted to thank ALD Connect is to create this open forum where the patients, their families, the researcher, the physicians, and everyone else who is involved in ALD care is able to come together in a room and discuss whatever that needs to be discussed and have the ability to have this open dialogue. And, I think it was so wonderful to have the session with the patient insights. And one of the mothers, I think, Alexis, said that it is so wonderful to see the physicians in the same room that we see. I see it a different way. I say that it's so wonderful for us to be able to hear from the patients and get inspired by your stories. So thank you for doing that. So I was invited to talk about an update on gene therapy for CALD. As Amber said, I work for Bluebird Bio. I'm also a transplanter by trade, so I did bone marrow transplant for various kinds of leukodystrophy for more than 20 years. And in that process, I've transplanted many patients with adrenal leukodystrophy. And if I could go to the next slide. One of the greatest professional joys that I have felt, and I'm sure all physicians have felt, is when their patient does well. So one of my patients who was transplanted many years ago graduated from Duke this summer. And he's just one of the many, many patients who are doing very well after a successful transplant. But that's not the full story. There are also patients who I have personally taken care of who went through transplant but did not survive because of complications related to transplant, complications like graft versus host disease or graft failure or other difficulties. And one has to really keep in mind this broader perspective that any treatment that is available comes with side effects, and the patient should have the ability to choose between different treatments that are available. And we as physicians and we as pharmaceutical companies should have the responsibility to be as transparent as possible with all the data and the information that we have. So part of what I'm going to be doing is to give you all the information that I have and take any questions that you have, and I'll answer to the best of my ability. There are also certain limitations that FDA puts on us as a representative of a biotech company. And I have to disclose, and I'm happy to disclose, that I'm an employee of Bluebird Bio, although I still work for Duke University on a part-time basis. And that I'll be speaking on behalf of Bluebird Bio at this meeting and not in any other capacity. I will not be able to give any medical advice. And I will, as it's bullet number 3, and I have been requested to provide an update on ELICEL program by ALD Connect. There are also a number of other bullet points for you to read and for me to explain that biotech is or pharmaceutical industry in general, is very highly regulated. And I cannot give you any promotional information about any product. I can talk about the risks associated with a particular product, and I will certainly do it. And what I can tell you about a product, in this case, our gene therapy product, Skysona, is what is in the label. And I will describe to you what a label is or or US prescribing information. And so my conversation will be limited by these regulations. I'm giving you some time to read through those bullet points, and then we will move to the next slide. So, in our commitment to be transparent to the patients, to the community, to everyone involved in ALD care, in the last year, we have had 4 presentations. The first one on the left side on the screen was the presentation by Dr. Florian Eichler, who needs no introduction. And he presented the data at the Child Neurology Society meeting last year on the outcomes, long-term efficacy, and safety of Elicell, which is the gene therapy product in 67 patients in cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy. I was fortunate to be invited to ALD Connect last year as well, and so I presented part of what I'm presenting here today in November of last year in Houston, and that was such a successful meeting. This year, in February, Dr. Christy Duncan, who is also in the audience and a very well-known transplanter in the field of adrenoleukodystrophy, she presented at the transplant meeting, the tandem meeting it's called, in, I think, San Antonio, on the evaluation of mobilization and apheresis and other conditioning regimen and other measures of the process of Elicell treatment. And that poster and other details are listed at the bottom of that slide. And then I also was invited to speak at ALD Alliance meeting in March of 2024 in Brooklyn, New York, where I gave an update on gene therapy. So at every time point, we have been sharing information about these patients. Dr. Eichler, in his presentation, a wonderful presentation on precision medicine, talked about 2 recent publications on the gene therapy. Elicell, which is the bluebird bioproduct. The first one, where Dr. Eichler is the first author, was on the lentiviral gene therapy for cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy, and that was the outcomes of our first trial called trial ALD 102. So there are a number of years of data, and all of that was presented. I'm not going to be talking about that. I think Dr. Eichler can certainly discuss further, and these publications are available. They are in the public domain, and your physician and any expert can talk about the outcomes data related to that paper. The second paper was on the hematological malignancy or blood cancer that developed in some patients who were treated with Elicell. We have already discussed this in previous meeting. It was part of the FDA approval process that there was a boxed warning. So it's a known risk associated with Elicell. But we, in our full commitment to transparency, decided to publish all patients who have developed hematologic malignancy, and there are 7 patients at the moment, and I will be able to discuss a little bit more detail about those 7 cases out of 67 patients who were treated in the 2 trials for adrenoleukodystrophy. So before I really truly talk about the current status of gene therapy, let me take you back to when the gene therapy was approved. And that was in September of 2022, after years of development, and I'll be able to share some of that information. After years of development and clinical trial, FDA approved it. The approval was what is known as a conditional approval or accelerated approval, which means that FDA felt that there is enough evidence of efficacy that it should be approved. But wonderful talk, by the way, before this one on clinical trials, Zareen. And so you made my conversation
Test.
Okay, that's better. So it was an accelerated approval, and what it means is that FDA felt that there is enough efficacy information that it should be approved. But as I was saying, that in the previous talk, there was a conversation about long-term follow-up. So FDA also mandated that we should have a long-term follow-up going to another 13 years, so a total of 15 years of follow-up. And certainly, FDA can review the efficacy and safety data during this period of time and make a decision about the approval status. So Skysona is was approved for to slow the progression of the neurological dysfunction in boys 4 to 17 years of age with early active cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy. And the previous conversations, I think, have informed you well on early and active cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy on the basis of the MRI findings and how the patient is doing with neurological function score, as well as whether there is gadolinium enhancement on MRI or not. There are certain limitations of use in the interest of time. They are all listed. This talk would be is being recorded and it would be available to you. All of these slides will be available to you to review that information in greater detail. But on this slide, there are 2 points I want to make. The first one is you see a black box on the right side. That's called a black box warning or a box warning, and that's given to any FDA approved product where there is a specific risk that the FDA would like to highlight in the interest of patient safety. And that risk here is the risk of developing blood cancer. The second point I would like to highlight on this slide is that we at Bluebird Bio proactively felt that as we are assessing the risk and benefit of Elicel in the context of its efficacy and the need for patients and and situations where not every patient has the ability to have a transplantation, that we need to revise or update this label. And one of the updates in the label was that if the patient has a matched suitable sibling, then transplant from sibling should be considered before a gene therapy with Elicel is considered. So again, a commitment to transparency and a commitment to what is best for the patient. So it takes a long time for something as novel and complex as gene therapy to be brought to market. It took more than 20 years in total from the initial conceptualization of this idea for adrenoleukodystrophy and almost 10 plus years of clinical trial, which are listed here, which led to the approval, as I said earlier, in September of 2022. There were 2 trials, 102 and 104, and you can see it. But in addition, we also did 2 other trials, 101 and 103, and these were to look at the outcomes related to transplant so that then one could truly make a comparison between what the outcomes are for patients who underwent transplantation, which is another option for certain patients, or with gene therapy. And all patients who were on these trials, 102 and 104, then subsequently enrolled on a long-term follow-up trial called 304, which is ongoing, and which will continue for a total of 13 years for each patient once they have enrolled on it. This is data from the 103 study in the outcomes of allogeneic transplant in patients with cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy. A very simple point I want to make here, which is that when you look at the overall survival, as well as the MFD free survival, which is major functional disability free survival, if you are unable to see, if you are unable to communicate, if you need G-tube for feeding, those are major functional disability. So if you don't have any major functional disability and you are alive, that is the MFD-free survival. And the most important factor that influenced MFD-free survival as well as overall survival was the early stage of the disease, underscoring the need for newborn screening, early diagnosis, getting to transplant or cell treatment as early as possible. But transplant also noted that paper that there are risks associated with transplant. The one I have highlighted is the risk of graft failure in significant number of patients, depending on what was the type of donor that was used. The typical journey of a patient receiving Skysona is probably known to you. Dr. Eichler has already described this to you earlier, where we need to collect the cells, and those cells are then sent to the manufacturing place where they are transduced or transfected with the cell, or cell is manufactured by that transfection, and then cell comes back to the patient who receives it after getting combination chemotherapy. Saying the same thing in another way. And then these are the two trials they already talked about, and the LTF 304, the long term follow up trial later on. There are certain differences between 102 and 104 trial. And those are that the conditioning regimen or the chemotherapy that is used before you can give the cell. It comes straight from the process of transplantation. That chemotherapy was different between these two trials. And also 104 was the most recent trial, and there is less follow-up data, but is still robust enough. At the time of this analysis, there was 36 months median of follow-up with 104 and almost 6 years with a 102 study. This is the outcomes data that was used for approval, and it is included in the label, which clearly showed at that time that patients treated with Skysona did better than patients who were untreated, as well as patients who were treated with Skysona and the allo HSCT population who were treated with matched sibling had very comparable outcomes. So that's the outcomes data. We are doing further analysis, and in due course, there will be more information available on their neurocognitive outcomes. Dr. Eichler's paper clearly talks about some of the other measures of outcome. But what I want to highlight is the risk of hematologic malignancy. And that is, this is from the black box, that hematologic malignancy, or in simple words, blood cancer, including life threatening cases of myelodysplastic syndrome, it is one variety of this, and acute myeloid leukemia have occurred in patients treated with Skysona. There were a total of 7 patients. The diagnosis of blood cancer happened between 14 months to 7.5 years after Skysona treatment, and they seem to be a result of incorporation of the lenti-D vector into the proto-oncogene, or the genes that then drive the blood cancer. It is really important, and that was one of the things that we included in an updated label, is that these patients need to be followed very, very carefully and require a blood count every 3 months. So these were the changes I already mentioned earlier to the label that we did in April of 2024 to highlight is that consider alternative therapy, including allogenic transplant, for patients who have suitable, willing, and available matched sibling donor before considering cell. That updated monitoring includes at least 15 years, and it includes blood count every 3 months, and to say that all patients are at risk of hematologic malignancy. It is important that the cancer be diagnosed as early as possible. So these are the 7 cases that have been well described in the New England Journal of Paper, and Dr. Eichler had shown a graphic from that paper. I can I have simplified that table uh, to include more specific information about the patients, how old they were, at the time of diagnosis, what their diagnosis was. On the top row, you will notice patients are given um, um, anonymized by giving them a random number, so you can't identify who is who, but we can certainly note that there was one patient in ALD 102 trial and 6 patients in ALD 104 trial that developed the blood cancer. The age at MDS diagnosis is listed here in the fifth row, and most of the patients actually all the patients have ranged between 10 to 15 years of age at the time of the blood cancer diagnosis. All of them have received treatment. 6 of the 7 patients have received allogenic transplantation for the treatment of blood cancer, and the seventh patient is in the process of getting ready for a bone marrow transplant. One patient passed away after allotransplant because of complications of allotransplant, which included chronic graft versus host disease. The most recent patient who received transplant continues to be in the hospital and is getting world class care in one of the best hospitals that I can think of for transplant for adrenoleukodystrophy. So, overall, 6 of the 7 patients who developed this are alive, and 6 of them have received allotransplantation. What are we doing about these cases of hematologic malignancy? Number one, we are obviously monitoring this very carefully. As per the requirement, we on a real-time basis within FDA guidelines have to inform the FDA as well as the investigators and an independent data safety monitoring committee about the patients who develop a hematologic malignancy. I've already told you we have updated the label, and FDA is very aware of it, and information to the physicians, the treatment centers, as well as the CALD community is very important for us, and we do that on a regular basis. We've also initiated a number of investigations into the cases of blood cancer to understand in greater detail what are the reasons behind it, and a very detailed analysis of this scientific deep investigation is included in the paper that was published in New England Journal of Medicine. So at the end of it, in a meeting like this, the question really comes up: how do you make decisions when you have serious treatments and you have serious toxicity? And the way I would, as a parent or as somebody who has done transplant for a long period of time, would look at what are the different risks associated with individual treatment option, and what are the best options available to a particular patient. And then the physician, who is an expert in transplantation and in adrenoleukodystrophy, and the family will make a decision about what is the best option for that particular patient. So, with allogenic transplant, you have the risk of graft versus host disease, you have a risk of transplant related mortality, and not everybody will have the donor availability. With gene therapy, there is issue related to the blood cancer I talked about. Availability, it's not available everywhere in the world. And then, of course, there are logistical issues of getting the gene therapy approved and so on. So one has to make that determination. Um, what uh, what we really want to also emphasize again is that heme malignancy is a serious complications, but truly at Bluebird, uh, we are committed to doing what is right for the patient, and having this an option, at least for those patients who have no other option, is our commitment. And that, I think, is really, really important. We continue to be, we are scientists, we are physicians, we are patient advocates, we are all of this. And we continue to monitor the scientific data, the patient outcomes, and we course correct as and when needed. And that's that cycle that you see on the screen. Also, as a responsibility of long term follow up, all patients who will get commercial or FDA approved Skysona product will be offered to enroll in a long term registry follow up study for 15 years. And I'm so glad that Judith is here. And if anybody has any questions, Judith Turiak is one of our team members who is in charge of the registry 502 study. And it's the post marketing. This will be in your classification called the phase 4 trial. So it is a post-marketing prospective multicenter observational long-term safety and effectiveness registry study for patients with cerebral adrenoleukodystrophy treated with LE-cell. There are primary outcome measures, endpoints, secondary. I want to thank the patient and the families, truly, without whom science doesn't move forward, clinical trials don't happen, we never make any advances. So, thank you to all of you and for inspiring us to do what we need to do. I also want to take a moment here to thank all the investigators, without many of whom are here in the audience, without whom none of these studies would have been possible. So, thank you. And then I want to thank the Bluebird Bio family, many of whom are here in the room. They're scattered, and they may raise their hands to just say, you work for Bluebird Bio. And I want to thank all of them because they worked very hard to make it available to you. And I can tell you on my personal note that their heart bleeds for you and it beats for you. So thank you.
Thank you.